Welcome. Hello. It's been a while. I've been busy. That is a fire truck. I live on a very busy street. So you're gonna hear... No, it's fine. Go ahead and siren for me. I live on a very busy street, so you're gonna hear some noises. That's not my fault. I'm not driving. I'm in bed. It's freezing here. I'm really cold, and so we're getting a little snuggly today. We're gonna talk about something super awesome and fun. I have already recorded this video once, and just my luck, I recorded it in portrait mode. So this is my second time recording this video. Awesome. This video has come highly requested among my friends specifically because I have not been able to shut up about the new Hunger Games book since it came out. And so I felt like something was in order, something was due, especially since I haven't posted anything in a really long time. Sorry. Again, I'm busy, okay? I'm busy. I know my 100 subscribers are just begging for a new release. Anyways, I have been working on this video for like 2 months of researching and all that jazz. We're gonna get really into it. It's gonna be awesome. I have my computer here, so I am gonna be looking down. I'm not gonna be looking at you the whole time. Sorry, you're lovely and you're beautiful and you look really good today, but I do need to remember what I want to say. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. If you're here, which you are, welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Did I say you look lovely today? I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar with the 2008 novel, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, and all of the subsequent sequels and prequels that have followed it. If not, this is an insane video to start your journey at, but I appreciate you being here nonetheless. So for some general housekeeping, I will explain the very basics of the world in which this series takes place. Please keep in mind that I will be spoiling just about everything that happens in the books, as well as going into various fan theories and sort of speculations made about the original text in relation to the grander political ideologies and whatnot. This video will be focusing mainly on the Hunger Games novels, rather than the movies. The movies are awesome, but they do alter quite a bit from the text. So to keep things less confusing, I will be focusing mainly on book canon, and I won't be talking about the movies as much. So the original Hunger Games novel, as well as all of its successors, take place in the distant future in the fictional country of Panem, which sits atop an eroded North America. So it's split into 13 districts as well as a capital. And the original novel takes place 74 years after the ending of the Dark Days, which was a civil war in which the districts rebelled against the capital. Following the war, the defeat of the districts and the total destruction of District 13, allegedly, came the Treaty of Treason, of which the main purpose was to prevent any future uprisings by establishing the annual Hunger Games as a reminder of the district's defeat. As well as instituting the beginning of the Hunger Games, the treaty stripped autonomy from the districts. So every year on July 4th, which is Independence Day currently in the United States, that is important, each district provides one male and one female tribute between the ages of 12 and 18 to fight to the death in a televised program. Every 25 years, there would be a quarter quell, where they add a special twist to the already awful games to sort of add an extra layer of brutality and intrigue to that year's games. The twist for each quarter quell was supposedly written out at the very beginning and would remain completely unknown until that year came. So for the 25th games, each district had to vote on their own tributes, which is like horrible. Imagine choosing the children to die from your community. Like, that's awful. For the 50th games, there were twice the amount of tributes, so there were 48 instead of 24, two of each gender from each district. And for the 75th games, the tributes were reaped from the existing pool of victors. And there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not this quarter quell theme had actually been written out at the beginning, or if it was President Snow's way of getting rid of the problematic victors. At the time of writing this, I have just finished the most recent addition to the series, Sunrise on the Reaping, which focuses on the 50th Hunger Games, which was the second quarter quell and the games where Hamish Abernathy won, or he survived. Which isn't a super important note, but in case you're watching this in the future and Suzanne Collins has released another addition to the series, it gives you an idea of the current lore that I'm working with. I do feel like this video is going to be a bit of a long one, so strap in, get a snack, snuggle up, put this on while you're doing your homework or washing your dishes or whatever. It's going to be awesome. So the main aim of this video is to explain the political landscape of Panem, but I will also be talking about the geographical importance as well as implications of every single decision that Collins made while writing these books. And Suzanne Collins has made it very evident in several interviews over the years that she only writes when she has something to say. So I believe it's a fair assumption to say that every single thing written into this series was intentional, and the overlying symbolism is important to remember throughout. There are so many symbols that are tied in throughout all of the novels, and there's no way that I'm going to be able to get all of them, but I think it's really, really important to remember, especially the times at which she wrote these books. The most recent one, Sunrise on the Reaping, the main theme of it was propaganda. And looking into the current state of the United States, it isn't crazy to say that every single one of these books was written in a time where that message was needed. I will also be talking a lot about class solidarity and critical race theory that is present throughout the text, but I want to be very clear that I'm a middle-class white person living in the global north. And although I've done a lot of research for this, I'm not qualified to speak on the lived experiences of people in marginalized groups that I'm not personally a part of. So I will be citing my sources for this video in the description so that you can hear from people who are more qualified to speak on those things. In an interview with Suzanne Collins published in the School Library Journal, she explained how the idea for the Hunger Games came to her. Quote, "One night I was lying in bed and I was channel surfing between reality TV programs and actual war coverage. On one channel, there's a group of young people competing for I don't even know, and on the next, there's a group of young people fighting in an actual war. I was really tired, and the lines between these stories started to blur in a very unsettling way. That's the moment when Katniss's story came to me," unquote. She also talked about how her father fought in Vietnam when she was a child, and she saw footage of Vietnam come on the TV, and when she saw it, all she knew about it was that her dad was there and that she was really scared. So we need to keep these things in mind while analyzing this text because, again, every decision that she made in regard to the politics of Panem was intentional. So Panem is a spectacle-driven, authoritarian police state, and at the very center of it all lies the capital. The capital holds centralized control of all economic and political power. And the citizens of the capital rely entirely on the imports of the districts. The districts themselves are economically specialized, with each district having distinct exports that only they can provide. So District 1 provides jewelry, District 2 provides masonry and weapons manufacturing, as well as supplying the peacekeepers to the districts. District 3 is technology and electronics, District 4 is fishing, District 5 is electricity, District 6 is transportation, District 7 is lumber, District 8 is textiles, District 9 is grain, District 10 is livestock, District 11 is agriculture, which is super important, and we'll get back to that one, and District 12 is coal. District 13 was at one point graphite mining and secretly nuclear weapons manufacturing, but after it was presumed destroyed, the citizens that survived all moved underground and lived as an independent nation under the rule of President Alma Coin. The reason that District 13 was allowed to do this rather than being completely obliterated was because they had nuclear weapons and the capital did not want to be in the middle of a nuclear war. So they were allowed to move underground in secret and have the rest of the districts presume that they were completely destroyed, and that is the result of trying to fight the capital. Like, that is the price that you pay. If you try to fight back, you will be completely destroyed. Just look at what happened to 13. District 13, however, isn't super relevant to this, as I will be talking mainly about Panem under the rule of President Coriolanus Snow, who I will talk a lot more about in a bit. The main districts that I'll be focusing on in this video are 11, 12, 1, and 2, as these are the places that I believe contain the most to discuss in terms of sociopolitical allegories and the way that they just tie to each other. Travel between the districts is strictly forbidden, and the only individuals who routinely move between districts are peacekeepers, capital officials, or workers transporting required goods, such as District 12's coal shipments sent directly to the capital. The restriction and isolation of resources is a deliberate political strategy designed to prevent any sort of resource sharing and solidarity among the districts. By isolating each district and ensuring that no one can access what another district produces, the capital guarantees that no district can become self-sufficient. The enforced dependency on the capital is obviously central to its control. Without the ability to trade freely or develop a form of diversified economies, the districts cannot develop meaningful autonomy. So the capital alone directs the flow of goods, ensuring that essential resources such as food, medicine, energy, and manufactured goods must pass through its oversight. The prohibition on inter-district travel therefore functions as an economic and political tool, reinforcing the capital's absolute dominance and preventing any possibility of regional independence. Because inter-district travel in Panem is strictly prohibited, the poorest citizens depend almost entirely on capital-regulated shipments of grain, oil, and other essentials for survival. Katniss Everdeen, the protagonist of the original trilogy, explains that the districts are fenced off and heavily monitored, making unauthorized movement nearly impossible and extremely dangerous because of the heavy surveillance. This geographic isolation prevents districts from accessing the natural resources or surplus goods that lie just outside of their districts, keeping them reliant on the capital's controlled distribution system. The original trilogy, as well as Sunrise on the Reaping, all take place in District 12 mainly, which is surrounded by a lush forest full of plants and animals that is unreachable due to an electric fence surrounding the district. Katniss hunts illegally in order to provide for her family, and hunting beyond the fence is forbidden precisely because it allows citizens to gather their own means of survival. They are told that there are dangerous animals outside of the fence and you shouldn't go there because it's dangerous, but really it's because they don't want you to be able to provide for yourself. Katniss notes that hunting is considered poaching, a term which in real-life usage refers to the illegal taking of wildlife, typically in violation of laws that are meant to protect species and conserve ecosystems. In Panem, however, the term is redefined, as any attempt to require independent resources is treated as criminal. The capital labels hunting as poaching solely to protect its monopoly on food distribution and, by extension, political power. This allows the government to weaponize hunger itself. The Hunger Games. If you are caught hunting, the punishment can equate to public whippings, as seen with Gale in Catching Fire, or even execution. Once a district child turns 12, their name is entered into the Reaping Bowl for the annual Hunger Games. At age 12, their name goes in once, at 13, twice, at 14, 3 times, and so on and so forth until they reach 18. By design, this creates a steadily increasing likelihood of selection as a child nears adulthood. However, the system is not that fair. For families living in destitute areas of the district, such as the seam of District 12, where dying of starvation is common, children may take out tesserae, a system of emergency rations consisting of 1 year's worth of grain and oil. Each tessera provides food for one person for 1 year, but in exchange, the recipient's name is added 1 extra time per tessera to the Reaping Bowl. For seam families with multiple children, tessera can multiply entries super quickly, and teenagers may have their names entered in dozens of times, dramatically increasing the risk of being reaped. In the beginning of the first Hunger Games, Katniss's friend Gale says that his name is in the Reaping Bowl 42 times, and he's only 18. The annual reaping in Panem is framed by the capital as a fair and impartial system. May the odds be ever in your favor. But the children who come from poorer families in the most impoverished districts specifically are statistically more likely to be reaped. And the capital ensures this through policies that force starving families to gamble with their children's lives in exchange for the possibility of just surviving another winter. While the children of the wealthier districts, especially 1 and 2, have never known hunger. For families living in the desperate poverty of Districts 11 and 12, hunger is a constant background of existence. Katniss describes starvation as an ordinary threat, something woven into the rhythm of everyday life where people routinely die from the simple lack of food. Her family's survival depends entirely on illegal hunting and bartering with the townsfolk for things like medicine. The more tesserae a family takes, the greater the child's chances of being selected. So a child from an affluent household may have their name entered only the mandatory number of times, but for children in especially impoverished families, that number can skyrocket. We see this in the first novel when Madge is making a joke about how she wants to look good if she's sent to her death, and Gale is pissed off by this, quite frankly, because his name is in the bowl 42 times and hers is only in there 5 times. Statistically speaking, she doesn't have to worry about being picked. This is a system that's intentionally designed to tie survival directly to risk. Families must choose between starvation and the possibility that their oldest, strongest children, the very ones they likely rely on, will be forced into a televised death match. The Capitol's claim that the odds are in anyone's favor but the elite collapses under the weight of this knowledge. The children that are most likely to be chosen are precisely those that are already being punished by poverty. By contrast, children of the wealthier districts, particularly 1 and 2, inhabit an entirely different world. These districts do not struggle to feed their families. Hunger is a foreign concept to them. Residents of District 1 craft the luxury goods for the capital, and families enjoy stable incomes, comfortable living situations, and they have access to plentiful food. District 2, which provides the peacekeepers, is even more integrated with the capital's power structure and benefits socially and economically from its loyalty. We see this in Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, when the Plinth family are from District 2 and they bought their way up to the capital because they had that choice. Once Snow comes more into power, this is clear that it's no longer an option, but at one point it was. And the result is that the children in these wealthier districts approach the reaping with far fewer entries in the bowl and far more physical advantages. The malnourished and often undersized children of the outlying districts stand no chance against the well-fed, healthy, and muscular children from the career districts. The wealthier districts transform the Hunger Games into a cultural institution centered around prestige and volunteerism. In Districts 1 and 2, children are trained from a young age in combat and survival skills, and though the capital technically prohibits this training before the reaping, it conveniently ignores these districts' open defiance because the system benefits from their participation. When a career tribute wins, they give glory to the capital. These children, which as I've mentioned are colloquially known as the careers, spend their adolescence preparing for the day that they'll volunteer to enter the arena. They learn to handle swords and knives and all sorts of other weapons with professional skill, and they train their bodies to maximum strength and agility. They're fed enough food throughout their life to build muscle and endurance, and nutritious food as well. They aren't relying on capital shipments of just grain and oil. And perhaps most importantly, they're raised to believe that the arena is a place of honor. They fully drink the capital Kool-Aid. When Katniss encounters these tributes in training, she immediately recognizes the imbalance. They're big, physically imposing, and they're fully confident in their ability to defeat her. They've been shaped and conditioned to see killing other people as a sport. They volunteer eagerly often because the games are a pathway to fame. This cultural indoctrination stands in stark opposition to the fear and despair in the poorer districts, where parents will cling to their children during the reaping and hope desperately that fate will spare them, that the odds will be in their favor. The political significance of the careers extends far beyond the games themselves. Their existence reinforces the hierarchical structure of Panem. Districts 1 and 2 serve as the capital's loyal enforcers, reaping the rewards of their obedience. And by encouraging these districts to dominate the games, the capital creates an elite class whose victories serve as propaganda themselves. Career triumphs are symbolic reinforcement that loyalty to the capital is rewarded with food and safety and glory and status. This division between districts is crucial to the capital's strategy of maintaining control. The Hunger Games are designed not only to punish the districts for past rebellion, but also to prevent any future unity. If the districts were to see themselves as allies, they could potentially rise up again, as we see in Catching Fire. But by creating these divisions, the capital ensures that the districts see each other as competition. For the poorer districts, especially 11 and 12, the careers represent a constant source of terror. Even if a malnourished, untrained tribute manages to survive the initial bloodbath, their odds remain slim. The careers form alliances and hunt as packs, using their often superior strength and weapons to eliminate the weaker competitors. Their very presence in the arena as trained killers transforms the games into some sort of predetermined slaughter. This is seen in Sunrise on the Reaping, when Ampert initiates the newcomers, and after Haymitch wins the games, when he's back on Caesar Flickerman's show, watching the recap, they've completely changed the interviews to make the newcomers seem less connected and less united, because they don't want the districts thinking that they have a chance at unity. This disparity highlights how deeply the capital has engineered the games as a weapon of class warfare. District 11 produces the food that feeds Panem, yet its people are forbidden to eat the harvest and face execution for stealing an apple. District 12 labors in coal mines but receive few resources in return. Their children are malnourished and unprepared, and they enter the reaping already disadvantaged, already beaten down by the systemic deprivation imposed by the capital. They are the forgotten, expendable children of Panem, whose lives the capital consumes either quickly through the arena or slowly through hunger. Wealth buys safety, health, strength, and preparation, and poverty buys additional entries in the reaping and the uncertainty of whether their families will be able to survive without them. Going into the games knowing that not only will you likely die, but your whole family will as well, because you won't be there anymore to look after them. Let alone the parentification of children. That is a horrific thing to have to grapple with when you're already marching your way to your own death. The games are a performance in which the capital broadcasts its power to the nation. They remind the districts that survival is a matter of privilege. The children of the wealthy fight for glory, while the children of the poor fight simply because they were unlucky enough to be born into hunger. The name Panem itself comes from the Latin phrase panem et circenses, which I may have said wrong. I do not speak Latin, which means bread and circus. And Panem really utilizes this concept by forcing the districts into their own specialized groups of exports to provide a constant supply of resources, bread, and the annual Hunger Games, circuses, to distract and control the citizens. Appeasing the people of the capital with food and entertainment, albeit gruesome, keeps them from rebelling. This directly mirrors the strategy of ancient Roman emperors who kept the public content with food and gladiator games to distract from any political unrest. Panem et circenses itself is a phrase that was coined by Roman satirist Juvenal about how the Roman populace became easily pacified by free food, bread, and extravagant public spectacles like gladiator fights. These things were provided by emperors, so if they did anything that could be seen as unjust or wrong, the citizens had already become uninterested in any form of politics because of the luxuries they'd been given by the government. Now, I said that we'd get back to Coriolanus Snow, the president of Panem. His specific political worldview is revealed through the original Hunger Games trilogy, but it's really brought center stage in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and it's constructed from his time as a kid living in the Dark Days, where his father was killed by rebels and he ended up being quite poor. He faces this class anxiety and post-war trauma in secret because his classmates remained very rich after the war. As a teenager in the Capital Academy, Snow absorbs the lessons of Dr. Volumnia Gall, the first ever Hunger Games game maker, who repeatedly states that humans are inherently dangerous, selfish creatures who must be controlled. Snow's childhood hunger amplifies these messages, having experienced starvation and instability firsthand from what he believes to be the fault of the districts. He internalizes the belief that any slip in status leads to chaos, and he projects this insecurity outward, equating the capital with civilization and the districts with barbarism. For Snow, district people are not fully human. No district should be capable of individuality outside of industrial output. In Snow's mind, the districts constitute a kind of subspecies. They're instinct-driven and incapable of restraint. They're fundamentally other. This is shown especially when Lucy Gray is the last tribute standing in the 10th Hunger Games, and it's announced over a loudspeaker that Coriolanus Snow has won the games. The dehumanization of the districts is essential for Snow's politics to function, because if a district does not benefit him as much as the others, coal mining for example, then they're not as important and therefore not worthy of anything more than the bare necessities to keep them from an uprising. I mean, how much coal do you think they're truly using? In contrast with District 1, whose main import to the capital is the jewelry and luxury items that supply their lavish lifestyles. If district citizens are less than fully human, then punishing them, starving them, surveilling their every move, and sending their children, who are often their lifelines, into the games is a necessity to keep them pacified. With all this being said, I'm sure you're wondering, why are people in the outlying districts even having children if they know that they have the chance to be sent off to the games to fight to the death on TV? Putting aside the probable lack of accessibility to female healthcare resources in the outer districts, let's think about the Middle Ages. People had children all the time, and they often had many children, under conditions shaped primarily by survival pressures that made reproduction seem less like a choice and more like an obligation. The continuation of family lines depended on new generations being born into danger and scarcity. In Panem, specifically the non-career districts, parents had children even though they lived with the constant fear that those children could eventually be reaped for the games. Yet, many still became parents because the oppressive structure of the capital left them with few alternatives for establishing a way to put food on the table. Think about a family in the Middle Ages. Women would have on average around 6 to 9 children, and 2 to 3 of them would die in infancy. To be clear, the Middle Ages span from the 5th to the 15th century, and 1,000 years is a very long time. But as Europe was in its own infancy, especially in the feudal era, there were economies that required large households to provide the labor necessary for basic survival, with farming, tending to livestock, processing food, and everything that comes with managing domestic duties demand a steady supply of hands. Children were economic assets as much as they were members of the household. If you think about it, Panem is quasi-feudal. The capital controls resources, the districts provide material and labor in exchange for safety in the form of peacekeepers, and in both feudal-era Europe and Panem, parents lived with the expectation that some of their children just might not survive. But these possibilities did not squash the structural necessity of raising children. Both groups also shared limited autonomy regarding family planning. Medieval families lacked modern contraception and often followed social norms that encouraged large families, while citizens in Panem had possibly limited access to contraceptives and lived under a regime that implicitly benefited from continuous population cycles to maintain a supply of tributes and laborers. To be clear, it is not explicitly stated in the text whether or not the people of the outlying districts had access to contraceptives or female reproductive health care in that. But if you think about it, the people in District 12 barely had access to medicine at all. Like, Katniss's mom runs the apothecary shop, and that's how the people of the seam get their medicine. They can't afford to go to the doctor. There's no pharmacy. How would they have access to contraceptives? And considering the way that the people of the capital reacted when they found out that Katniss was pregnant during catching fire, I don't know if I would say that they would be very pro-choice. Which is interesting, because that really draws the line between pro-birth and pro-life. They have no problem with sending children to the games to be killed, but as soon as someone's pregnant, they can't be sent there. Snow's participation as a mentor in the 10th Hunger Games in Ballad exposes contradictions in this worldview. The moment that he meets Lucy Gray Baird, her intelligence and emotional acuity clash with everything that he's been taught about the people of the districts. Her behavior challenges the claim that district people lack emotional sophistication, and her music reveals a cultural richness that the capital insists does not exist in the districts. Snow himself cannot reconcile with this idea. If Lucy Gray is typical of the districts, then the capital's ideology is a lie. So to resolve this conflict, he convinces himself that Lucy Gray is Covey and therefore not really district. The Covey, with their nomadic history, distinct wardrobe, musical lineage, and internal customs, become, in Snow's mind, a separate category of personhood that he can admire without threatening his belief in district inferiority. He categorizes Lucy Gray as an exception, telling himself that her elegance and creativity are byproducts of her Covey heritage and not evidence of district humanity. The Covey identity functions as Snow's psychological loophole. It's an excuse to feel affection for someone he should despise, according to capital doctrine. This rationalization is also fueled by his need to preserve the emotional numbness demanded by Gall's teaching. Any acknowledgement of shared humanity with the districts risks eroding the moral detachment required to wield power in Panem. Snow's paranoia about Lucy Gray grows precisely because she threatens that detachment. The moment that she acts unpredictably, when she defies capital expectations in the arena, and when she charms the audience, and when she survives through cunning rather than brute force, he becomes terrified of her because of what she represents. The possibility that district people are not inferior. His later belief that she may betray him is heavily influenced by Gall's manipulations and warnings about the danger of compassion. When he chooses to turn on her in the woods, he symbolically destroys the only evidence that contradicted his worldview. Through this act, he reasserts the capital's dehumanizing narrative and restores the emotional distance that he needs to embrace the political cruelty that will define his later rule. From this very foundation, Snow builds a political system that weaponizes spectacle. He supports and later expands institutions such as economic rationing and peacekeeper militarization and the televised Hunger Games. And he believes them to be morally correct because the districts have been so heavily propagandized as inhuman. Snow's commitment to the games reflects Gall's philosophy that spectacle reveals human nature, an idea that is revisited in Catching Fire when Snow authorizes a quarter quell that is engineered to annihilate the victors who threaten capital authority. Many of those victors had history of rebellion, such as Beatty, whose own son was sent into the games because he was too valuable to the capital, but he had a spark of rebellion in him. Snow fears empathy. Every time capital citizens feel sympathy for a tribute, Snow sees the foundations of Panem cracking. And I believe that's why the 75th Hunger Games was such a shit show. The audience was not happy that any of these tributes were going back. They were horrified. They loved these people for years and years, and now they have to watch their favorite victors be sent back. I think that quarter quell, since it's alleged, since it's a speculation, if it had been written up by Snow, I think that was the beginning of his downfall. That was one of the worst choices he could have made. He truly, truly underestimates the power of compassion and empathy that people have for one another, especially after they've seen them for so long and they feel as if they know them. No district destabilizes Snow more than District 12. Its poverty should make it docile in his eyes, I suppose, yet it becomes the birthplace of two of his greatest threats, Lucy Gray and Katniss. When Katniss covers Rue's body in flowers in the Hunger Games, Snow recognizes the gesture as the same kind of defiance that once drew him to Lucy Gray. Because District 12 undermines his ideological claims, Snow eventually directs disproportionate violence against it. The firebombing of District 12 is the purge of a geography that repeatedly generates disruptions to the capital narrative. District 12 embodies everything that Snow fears, and thus becomes, in his mind, the epicenter of a kind of contagion. Snow's political ideology is therefore built on denial. He denies the district's humanity, and he denies his own emotional vulnerability. The Covey loophole that he invents for Lucy Gray is the clearest evidence for this. If even one district girl can be fully human, then all of them can, and the entire system becomes indefensible. Snow spends his life suppressing Lucy Gray's existence. I know this is supposed to be objective, but another stupid thing that he did was showing Haymitch at the end of Sunrise on the Reaping the evidence of Lucy Gray. I think that was absurd. Why would he do that? I suppose it's a power thing, but what the hell is that about? You spend your entire life, first of all, stuck on a situationship from 60 years ago. Get over it. Get a life. Anyways, District 12 is divided into two distinct social populations. So in the seam, coal miners are described as having brown hair and olive skin, and a lot of people have interpreted this as them being indigenous coded or otherwise mixed race. They endure the most dangerous and physically demanding labor while living in extreme poverty. By contrast, the majority of the district's town dwellers are described as blonde with blue eyes, and they possess, albeit slightly, more wealth, food security, and social privilege. Even within a single district, there are class and race distinctions that separate people. It's also super important to note that District 12 is located in Appalachia. Appalachia? Appalachia pronunciation. Appalachia. District 12 is located in Appalachia, which has a diverse and historically rich Indigenous presence. So the implication that the people of the seam are of Indigenous descent isn't really a stretch. District 11 exemplifies racialized labor most explicitly. Its citizens are described as having dark skin and working agricultural fields that produce the food they cannot consume. Because of the tesserae system, children such as Rue and Thresh are disproportionately vulnerable to being selected for the Hunger Games, reinforcing the pattern whereby the most oppressed are exploited the most. The capital enforces the agricultural labor of the district through strict control over resources. These conditions mirror historical systems of racialized agricultural labor, where marginalized, specifically Black populations, were forced into intensive labor to sustain the elite. According to the official Panem map on the Hunger Games wiki, District 11 is located primarily on what is currently the U.S. states of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. This southern location, combined with its largely Black population, echoes historical associations in the United States between the South, plantation economies, and racially enforced labor. Just as the antebellum South relied on enslaved African labor to sustain its cotton, tobacco, and other cash crop industries, District 11's population is tasked with producing food for the capital while receiving none of its benefits. Cadmus notes that in 12, none of the children are familiar with mining as they aren't allowed to enter the mines until they're 18, at which point they've aged out of the reaping. Rue, however, talks about her time in the trees picking fruit, mentioning that because of her small frame, she was used to climbing for the food at the tops of the trees. In Panem, citizens of District 11 are visually coded as Black, and their youth and bodies are systematically exploited through child labor and forced entry into the Hunger Games, just as enslaved African Americans were forced into grueling labor from childhood. By situating District 11 in the South and coding its population as Black, Collins creates a textual parallel to real-world histories of racialized labor. The Covey, a nomadic people forcibly relocated to District 12, face both labor exploitation and cultural erasure. Lucy Gray Baird, a Covey tribute, is continuously described in ways that are less than human, allowing Snow and the Capitol to admire her as an exception while still maintaining the ideological dehumanization of district populations. The Covey's distinct cultural identity is erased or exoticized to justify their subordination, further embedding the intersection of race and labor exploitation in Panem's hierarchy. Children from impoverished and majority darker-skinned districts are far more likely to be selected and enter the arena malnourished and disadvantaged. While the career districts get preparation and, most importantly, financial support. They do not have to worry about making it through the games because they're hungry. They get sponsors. The capital's dominance depends on fragmentation. By isolating the districts economically and geographically, it prevents any sort of solidarity between the districts and even between the people within the districts, as I've mentioned. And therefore, it is beautifully ironic when the very humanity that Snow denies exists in the districts becomes his own undoing. Compassion spreads so much faster than fear. The politics of Panem show us that authoritarian regimes survive on convincing people that some lives mattered less than others. To get real for a second, as someone who lives in Canada, I am so disgusted and appalled by what is happening in the United States right now. and it's impossible not to tie the parallels into the Hunger Games when I read it. It is too close. It should not be that close. People who have always had power feel threatened when the people who look and think exactly like them are not the only people whose voices are being heard. Empires can manufacture hunger and broadcast violence, but they cannot extinguish the stubborn belief that a better world is possible. And time again, history has shown that hope is the spark that lights the fire. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I missed, as I mostly touched on the broader aspects, and I didn't even get into the politics of what could happen to a victor once they won the game. So if you'd like to see that in another video, or if there's anything else that you think that I missed, please let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. This video has taken me a really long time, so I hope that you enjoyed. And if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!